The reek of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage clung to the hallway like a shroud. It was the smell of defeat, of dreams left to curdle in the dim, buzzing light of a faulty fluorescent tube. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb and clumsy from the biting November chill that had seeped through my threadbare coat. The lock on my apartment door, 3A, was a familiar enemy, always sticking, always demanding a jiggle and a curse before surrendering. Tonight, it felt like a final insult. Inside, the air was just as cold. I couldn't afford to run the heating for more than an hour a day, a desperate gamble against the encroaching winter. The small space was my entire world, a combined living room and kitchen, a tiny bathroom with a perpetually dripping faucet, and a bedroom just big enough for my daughter Lily's bed and my own pull-out sofa. It was a testament to making do, to surviving on the frayed edges of a city that had long ago stopped noticing people like me. A soft cough echoed from the bedroom. My heart, already a heavy stone in my chest, sank deeper. I tiptoed in, my worn nursing shoes making no sound on the linoleum. Lily was asleep, her small face pale in the sliver of moonlight filtering through the grimy window. Her chest rose and fell in a shallow, worrying rhythm. The little wheeze that accompanied each exhale was a sound I knew better than my own name. It was the monster under her bed, the shadow in the corner of every room. I was a nurse. I spent my days tending to others, a calm and capable professional dispensing comfort and medication. But here, in the quiet dark of my own life, I was just a mother, terrified and utterly powerless. Lily's asthma was a cruel thief, stealing her breath, her childhood, and my peace of mind. The double shift I'd just finished at the clinic, a grueling 16 hours of changing bedpans and placating anxious families, had been for nothing. The extra money was already earmarked for the rent, 2 weeks overdue, and the bright pink eviction notice taped to our door was a screaming reminder of how close to the edge we were living. Her breathing hitched. A cough, louder this time, racked her small frame. I was at her side in an instant, my hand on her back, whispering soothing words that felt like lies. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with the familiar panic. "Mommy," she rasped, her voice a tiny thread of sound. "It's tight." "I know, baby, I know. Just breathe with me." I reached for her emergency inhaler on the nightstand, my hand closing around empty plastic. My blood ran cold. I shook it, a frantic, useless gesture. Nothing. The prescription had run out yesterday. I was supposed to pick up the refill after my shift, but Mrs. Gable in room 204 had coded, and in the chaos, I'd forgotten. A wave of self-loathing washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. How could I forget? Of all the things to forget. Lily's breaths were coming in ragged, whistling gasps now. The panic in her eyes was a mirror of my own. The pharmacy was closed. The emergency room was a 40-minute bus ride away, a journey we couldn't afford in time or money. My mind raced, sifting through desperate, impossible options. Then, a memory sparked. A piece of neighborly gossip from Mrs. Henderson on the first floor. A retired doctor, you know. Very distinguished. Lives up in 5B Dr. Miller, she'd called him. An old man who kept to himself. It was a long shot. A wild, desperate hope. But it was the only one I had. "I'll be right back, sweetie," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm going to get help." I pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and ran, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't even bother to grab my coat. The hallway was a blur. The elevator was broken, as usual. I took the stairs, my own lungs burning as I pounded up the concrete steps. 1 flight. 2. 3, 4. The numbers on the doors swam before my eyes. 5B. I had to find 5B. But in my terror-fueled haze, I didn't stop at the 5th floor. I kept climbing, all the way to the top, to the single, imposing door of the penthouse. In my fractured mind, the top floor must be where the most important person, the doctor, would live. The door was heavy, dark wood, with no number on it at all. It didn't matter. I didn't hesitate. I raised my fist and banged on it, the sound echoing in the silent, empty hall. I pounded again, harder, my knuckles scraping against the wood. "Please," I cried, my voice cracking. "Please, help me." My daughter can't breathe. For a long moment, there was only silence. I sagged against the door, a sob of despair tearing from my throat. It was a mistake. No one was here. The penthouse had been empty for years, a local legend whispered about by the building's tenants. Then, I heard it. The slick, metallic sound of multiple locks being disengaged. The door didn't creak open. It swung inward with a silent, expensive weight, revealing a slice of a world I didn't know existed. The light from within was warm and golden, a stark contrast to the sickly yellow of the hallway. It spilled onto the worn carpet, illuminating a man who was nothing like the retired doctor I had imagined. He was tall, impossibly so, and filled the doorway with the breadth of his shoulders. He wore a suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed molded to him, the fabric a deep charcoal gray that absorbed the light. His white shirt was stark against the tanned column of his throat, the top button undone. He wasn't old. He was somewhere in his 30s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, all sharp angles and unyielding planes. His hair was black, cut short and severe, but it was his eyes that held me captive. They were the color of storm clouds, and they swept over me with an unnerving intensity, taking in my frantic state, my cheap nurse's scrubs, my tear-streaked face. There was no surprise in his expression, no annoyance, just a calm, predatory assessment. I'm so sorry," I stammered, shrinking under his gaze. "I thought I was looking for the doctor. My little girl, she can't breathe." The words tumbled out, a messy, desperate flood. "Her inhaler is empty. Please, I need a doctor." He didn't speak. He simply watched me, his stillness a heavy weight in the air. The silence stretched, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. I could feel the precious seconds ticking by, each one a lifetime for Lily. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. It was a voice accustomed to command, to being obeyed without question. "Which apartment?" "3A," I whispered, my throat raw. He didn't move from the doorway. He lifted a hand, not to me, but to his ear, where a nearly invisible earpiece was nestled. His lips barely moved. "Dr. Evan to 3A. Now. Severe pediatric asthma attack. Bring a full kit." He listened for a second, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't care what he's doing. Get him there." He dropped his hand. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds. It was a display of power so swift and absolute it left me reeling. Then, he took a step back, holding the door open wider. "Step inside," he said. It was not an invitation. It was a command, delivered with the same quiet finality as his call. "You will wait here." My first instinct was to refuse, to run back down to Lily. But my legs wouldn't obey. There was something in his gaze, an authority that bypassed reason and went straight to a primal instinct for obedience. And a terrifying, traitorous part of me knew he was right. The most useful thing I could do now was stay out of the way of the help he had summoned with such impossible speed. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, torn between my daughter and this dangerous stranger. His eyes narrowed. Inside. Now. I stepped over the threshold, from the familiar misery of my world into the alien landscape of his. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound of the locks engaging again echoing like the closing of a cell. The air was different here. It smelled of old leather, expensive cologne, and something else. Something clean and metallic, like rain on steel. The foyer was larger than my entire apartment. The floor was polished black marble, reflecting the soft light from a modern chandelier that hung like a cascade of diamonds from the impossibly high ceiling. I stood there, a small, shabby island in an ocean of wealth, wringing my hands. I felt exposed, out of place, a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. The man watched me for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked down a wide hallway, his expensive shoes making no sound on the thick, dark rug. "Wait in here," he said over his shoulder, gesturing to an open doorway. The room was a library, or a study. Walls were lined from floor to ceiling with books, their leather spines gleaming. A massive desk of dark wood dominated one side of the room, its surface clear except for a sleek silver laptop and a glass of amber liquid. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of the city lights, a glittering tapestry of 1,000 lives that felt 1,000,000 miles away from my own. I didn't dare sit on the plush leather chairs. I stood in the center of the rug, my arms wrapped around myself, and waited. Every second was an agony. My mind was with Lily. Was the doctor there yet? Was she okay? Could she breathe? The silence in the penthouse was absolute, a stark contrast to the cacophony of fear in my head. I began to pace, the soft rug muffling my frantic steps. Who was this man? How could he summon a doctor with a single, whispered command? The name on the building's directory for the penthouse had been a holding company, a string of anonymous letters. No one lived here. Everyone knew that. A lifetime later, maybe only 10 minutes, he returned. He was holding a phone to his ear. He stopped in the doorway, leaning against the frame as if he owned the very air within it. "Status," he said into the phone. He listened, his gaze fixed on my face, watching my reaction. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Stabilize her. I want a full pediatric nebulizer and a supply of albuterol in the apartment within the hour. And a 24-hour monitoring service. One of your best nurses." "Yes, I'll hold." He held the phone slightly away from his ear, the tinny sound of hold music, a bizarre counterpoint to the tension in the room. "Your daughter's name is Lily," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Her breathing is stabilizing. The doctor is administering a nebulizer treatment now. Her oxygen saturation is back up to 96%. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees went weak. I swayed, grabbing the back of a chair for support. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back streamed down my face. "Oh, thank God," I sobbed. "Thank you." He ignored my thanks. His focus was absolute, his expression unchanged. "Your name is Emma Collins. You're a registered nurse at City General. You're 28 years old. You have $6,427 in medical debt, and you are 2 months behind on your rent. Your ex-boyfriend, the father of your child, is a man named Richard Miller." He spoke the words in a flat, dispassionate monotone, as if reading from a file. My file. The relief curdled into ice-cold fear. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. How do you know that?" "I know everything that happens in my building," he said, as if that explained everything. He put the phone back to his ear. "Yes. The cost is irrelevant. Just get it done." He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. He pushed off from the doorframe and walked toward me, his movements fluid and deliberate, like a panther closing in on its prey. I instinctively took a step back, my hand flying to my mouth. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the dark stubble that shadowed his jaw. He was handsome, I realized with a jolt of inappropriate awareness, but it was a dangerous kind of beauty. It was the beauty of a storm, of a perfectly crafted weapon. "You have a problem, Emma Collins," he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "A problem bigger than your daughter's asthma or your overdue rent." I don't understand," I whispered. "Richard Miller," he said, the name a curse on his lips. "He stole from me. A significant amount of money. And when my associates went looking for him, he gave them a name and an address. Yours." My world tilted on its axis. Rick. Of course it was Rick. He had disappeared 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of empty promises and a note saying he needed to find himself. I should have known he would find trouble instead. "I don't know anything about that," I said, my voice pleading. "I haven't seen him in months. I don't have any money. Look at me. Look at where I live. Do I look like I'm hiding a fortune?" "No," he conceded, his eyes raking over me again, this time with a flicker of something that might have been pity, or perhaps just cold analysis. "You look desperate. Which is why they would believe you're the perfect person to hold something for him. Desperate people are easily controlled." He took another step closer. "He didn't just steal from me. He also made an enemy of the Petrov family. They are not as discerning as I am. They believe you are involved. They believe you know where the money is." The name Petrov meant nothing to me, but the way he said it sent a fresh wave of terror through my veins. "That's insane. I don't know anything." "I believe you," he said, and the simple statement was a small, fragile relief. "But they won't. They have been watching your building, watching you, watching your daughter." His gaze was sharp, pinning me in place. "Knocking on my door tonight was the luckiest mistake you have ever made. Had you knocked on any other door, had you tried to take her to the hospital, they would have intercepted you." I couldn't process it all. It was too much. Rick, stolen money, rival families, men watching my daughter. It was like a plot from a movie, a dark, violent story that had suddenly crashed into my reality. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear and confusion. What do they want? The money. And to send a message to me by hurting something I have taken an interest in. His eyes held mine, and a new, terrifying understanding began to dawn. By bringing you in here, by helping you, I have claimed you. In their eyes, you and your daughter are now my property, and they will try to take you from me to prove a point. Property. The word was a slap in the face. I wasn't a person to him, just a possession, a pawn in some dark game I didn't understand. A surge of defiance born of pure terror rose up in me. "I'm not your property," I said, my voice trembling but firm. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a cold, humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. "You are now," he said softly, "because it is the only thing keeping you and your child alive." He turned and walked to the massive window, looking out at the city below. "The doctor will stay with Lily for the night. My man, Marcus, is outside your apartment door. No one will get in. But you cannot go back there. It is not safe." "Not go back? Where are we supposed to go?" He turned from the window, his silhouette a dark, powerful shape against the glittering skyline. "You will stay here." "With me?" The words hung in the air, An edict. A sentence. A promise. I stared at him, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I had knocked on the wrong door seeking a doctor, a savior. Instead, I had found a king in his castle, a devil in his domain. And he had just informed me that I was never leaving. The night passed in a blur of surreal horror and unnerving comfort. He showed me to a bedroom down a long, silent hall. It was larger than my living room and bedroom combined, decorated in muted tones of cream and gray. The bed was enormous, piled high with pillows and covered in a duvet that felt like a cloud. A door on one side led to an ensuite bathroom of white marble, stocked with expensive toiletries and fluffy white towels. It was a room from a magazine, a place of quiet, sterile luxury. "Lily will be brought up in the morning," he said from the doorway, his voice devoid of emotion. "A room is being prepared for her next to this one. You will have everything you need." He paused. "My name is Damon." Damon. The name suited him. It sounded hard, unforgiving. "I thank you for helping Lily," I managed to say, the words feeling inadequate and absurd. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I protect what is mine," he said, and then he was gone, pulling the door closed with a soft click. There was no sound of a lock, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was a prisoner. A well-cared-for prisoner in a gilded cage, but a prisoner nonetheless. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed, every muscle tense, my mind a whirlwind of fear. I thought of Lily, safe for now, with a doctor by her side. I thought of Rick, and a deep, bitter anger burned through the terror. How could he do this to us? How could he entangle us in his sordid, dangerous life and then just disappear? And I thought of Damon, a man who commanded the world from a penthouse fortress, who spoke of people as property and moved pieces on a board I couldn't even see. Morning came not with the sun, but with a soft knock on the door. A woman stood there, older, with kind eyes and hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple black dress and a white apron. "Good morning, miss," she said with a faint Eastern European accent. "Mr. Damon said you would be awake. My name is Elena. I am the housekeeper. I have brought you some coffee." She carried a silver tray with a steaming carafe, a porcelain cup, and a small plate of pastries. The aroma of fresh coffee was a small, normal comfort in a world that had become unhinged. "Thank you," I whispered. "Your daughter is awake," Elena said, her smile gentle. "The doctor says she is much better. We have moved her to the room next door. She is asking for you." I was on my feet in an instant, my heart leaping with a desperate, hopeful beat. I followed Elena to the adjacent room. The door opened into a child's fantasy. The walls were painted a soft pink, with a mural of a forest filled with friendly-looking animals. A beautiful white canopy bed stood in the center, and Lily was sitting up in it, surrounded by a mountain of new stuffed animals. She was wearing brand new pajamas with cartoon unicorns on them, and her face, though still a little pale, had a healthy color I hadn't seen in months. A new state-of-the-art nebulizer sat humming quietly on a table beside her. "Mommy!" she cried, her voice clear and strong. She held up a large, fluffy teddy bear. "Look! His name is Barnaby." I rushed to her side, gathering her into my arms, burying my face in her hair. She smelled clean and sweet. I held her tight, feeling the steady, easy rhythm of her breathing against my chest. The relief was so profound it felt like a physical blow. "Oh, baby," I was so worried. "The doctor gave me unicorn medicine," she said, her eyes shining. And Elena brought me pancakes. And Mr. Damon said I could have any toy in the whole world. I pulled back, my blood running cold again. Mr. Damon was here? Uh-huh. He's nice, she said with the simple, unwavering judgment of a child. He's very tall. He said Barnaby is my special guard bear and he'll keep all the bad dreams away. I looked at the bear she was clutching. It was a beautiful, expensive toy, far nicer than anything I could ever afford. A gift from our captor. The duality of the situation was dizzying. He had threatened me, claimed me as property, but he had given my daughter a fantasy bedroom and a guard bear. He was a monster who brought her pancakes. Later that day, Elena showed me the closet in my room. It was filled with new clothes. Not my style exactly. They were too elegant, too expensive, but they fit perfectly. Dresses made of soft cashmere, silk blouses, tailored trousers, even shoes and handbags. It was a uniform for my new life, a costume for the role I was now forced to play. There was no sign of my old nurse's scrubs. They had been disposed of, another piece of my former life, erased. I spent the day in a state of anxious limbo, staying by Lily's side, reading her stories from a collection of brand new books that had appeared on her shelf. I saw no one but Elena, who brought our meals on silent feet, and the new nurse, a quiet woman named Sarah who came to check Lily's vitals every few hours. Of Damon, there was no sign, but I felt his presence everywhere, in the silent efficiency of the staff, in the quality of the food, in the oppressive, watchful silence of the penthouse itself. The windows, I discovered, did not open. He appeared that evening, as silently as he had left. I was sitting in a chair by Lily's bed, watching her sleep, her breathing deep and even. I didn't hear him enter, but a subtle shift in the air, a drop in temperature, made me turn. He was standing in the doorway watching us. He had changed from his suit into a simple black sweater and dark trousers. The casual clothes did nothing to soften his intimidating presence. If anything, they made him seem more dangerous, less like a businessman and more like a predator at rest. "She is better," he stated, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you. The doctor, the medicine, I could never have—" I trailed off, not knowing how to finish. He walked into the room, his steps measured and silent. He didn't look at me, but at Lily. His gaze softened, just for a fraction of a second, a fleeting glimpse of something other than cold control. No child should have to fight for breath. He looked at the guard bear, Barnaby, tucked under Lily's arm. My men found a tracking device sewn into the lining of her old teddy bear, the one Miller gave her. Nausea churned in my stomach. Rick had put a tracker on our daughter. He had used her, used us, as bait or insurance. The last vestiges of any lingering affection for the man I once loved curdled into pure, unadulterated hatred. He put her in danger. He put you both in the crosshairs of a war you knew nothing about. Damon corrected, his voice hard as flint. The Petrovs are old world. They believe in blood for blood. They would have taken her to force you to give them information you don't have. He finally looked at me, his storm gray eyes boring into mine. "Do you understand now? Do you understand why you cannot leave this place?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The fear was a living thing inside me, but it was shifting. Before, I had been afraid of him. Now, I was beginning to understand that the real danger lay outside these walls, outside the circle of his terrifying protection. He was the lesser of two evils, a monster who kept other, more chaotic monsters at bay. "We need to find Rick," I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. I can help. I know him. I know how he thinks. Damon raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his expression. He is a coward. He will be hiding somewhere he feels safe, somewhere familiar. He has a cousin, I said, the memories surfacing, in the old warehouse district down by the docks. He used to work there. He always said it was the one place no one would ever think to look for him. It was a long shot, a half-remembered piece of a conversation from years ago, but it was something. Damon considered this, his gaze intense. He pulled out his phone and typed a rapid message. I will have my people look into it. He put the phone away. You have been useful. The words were a cold assessment, not a compliment, but I felt a strange flicker of pride. I was no longer just a victim, a piece of property. I was a participant. We stood in silence for a few moments, the only sound the soft hum of the city outside and the gentle rhythm of Lily's breathing. The tension between us was a palpable force, a mixture of fear, gratitude, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of attraction. I was acutely aware of his size, of the power that radiated from him in waves. He was a dangerous man, a killer, a criminal. But he had saved my daughter. The contradiction was tearing me apart. Why? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. Why are you doing all of this? For me? For us? He turned his gaze from Lily to the window, his profile stark against the city lights. For a long time, I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, laced with a bitterness that seemed ancient. When I was a boy, younger than she is, I watched my family die. They were murdered by our rivals. My father. He made a mistake. He showed mercy to an enemy. He thought it would be seen as a sign of strength, of honor. It was seen as weakness. He paused, and in the silence I could almost hear the echoes of that long-ago tragedy. They came to our home. They killed my mother first, so my father would have to watch. Then they killed him. They left me alive, a child in a house full of ghosts, to send a message to everyone else. The message was simple. There is no mercy in this world. There is only strength and weakness, power, and those who are crushed by it. My heart ached for the boy he must have been. I saw him then, not as the terrifying crime lord, but as a lonely, traumatized child who had rebuilt the world in a way that would keep him safe, a fortress of power and control with walls of ice. I'm so sorry, I whispered. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were dark pools of memory. I swore that day that I would never be weak, that I would never fail to protect what was mine. I built this empire on that promise. The Petrovs are a threat to my world, to my control. By targeting you, they made you part of my world. They made you mine to protect. He took a step closer, his voice dropping even lower. I will not fail. I will not allow them to harm you or your child. I will burn their entire world to the ground first. The raw, violent possessiveness in his voice should have terrified me, and it did. But underneath the fear, something else stirred, a profound, overwhelming sense of safety. For the first time in my adult life, I felt shielded. The constant, grinding anxiety of single motherhood, of poverty, of loneliness, receded in the face of his absolute, terrifying certainty. He was a storm, but he was my storm. He was my shield. In that moment, the gilded cage began to feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. The next few days settled into a strange routine. Lily thrived. Freed from the constant struggle to breathe, her true personality emerged, bright, bubbly, and endlessly curious. She adored Elena, who indulged her with cookies and stories, and she was fascinated by Marcus, the stoic giant who stood guard outside our rooms. She would wave to him, and once I saw the corner of his mouth twitch in what might have been a smile. Damon remained a distant, powerful presence. He was gone for long stretches of the day and sometimes the night. I knew he was hunting. Hunting for Rick. Hunting the Petrovs. When he was home, the atmosphere in the penthouse crackled with a low-level energy. He would appear in the doorway of Lily's room and watch her play, his expression unreadable. He spoke little, but his eyes followed my every move. One afternoon, I was sketching with Lily at a small table in her room when he appeared. He didn't say anything, just leaned against the doorframe and watched. Lily, completely unafraid of him, held up her drawing. "Look, Mr. Damon. It's you and me and Mommy and Barnaby. We're a family." I froze, my crayon hovering over the page. I dared a glance at him. A family. The innocent, impossible word hung in the air. I expected him to scowl, to leave, to say something cold and dismissive. Instead, a strange, complicated emotion flickered in his eyes. He pushed off the doorframe and walked over, crouching down to look at the drawing. It was a child's typical scrawl. Stick figures with wild hair and lopsided smiles under a giant yellow sun. He reached out a finger and gently touched the figure that was supposed to be him. "Very good, little one," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. He looked up at me, over Lily's head, and our eyes met. The moment was charged, intimate, and deeply confusing. It was a glimpse of a different man, a man who might have been, had his world not been shattered so violently. The moment was broken by the buzz of his phone. He stood, his expression hardening back into its usual mask of command. He answered it, listening intently. "Where?" he asked. A pause. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and looked at me. "They found him," he said. The words were flat, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. "Miller. He was at the warehouse you mentioned. He was trying to sell information to the Petrovs." "Is he—" I couldn't finish the question. "He's alive." For now, he turned to leave. "Stay with the child. Do not leave these rooms." "Wait," I said, standing up. "Take me with you." The words were out before I had time to think about them. He turned back, his eyes narrowing. "Absolutely not. It is not safe." "Rick is a coward, but he's also a manipulator," I insisted, my heart pounding. "He will lie. He will tell you whatever he thinks you want to hear. But I know him. I know when he's lying. I can help you get the truth." It was a reckless, insane idea, but I felt a desperate need to be part of this, to face the man who had ruined my life and endangered my daughter. I needed to see this through. Damon studied my face, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something else. Respect? "You have a core of steel under all that fear, don't you, Emma Collins?" he murmured, almost to himself. He was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. I held my breath. "Fine," he said finally, his voice sharp. "You will come. But you will do exactly as I say. You will not speak unless I tell you to. You will not leave the car. Is that understood?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The ride to the docks was silent and tense. I sat in the back of a black, armored SUV with Damon while Marcus drove. The windows were tinted so dark that the world outside was a muted gray blur. The city I knew, the city of bustling streets and crowded buses, felt a million miles away. We were moving through a different version of it, a shadow city of power and violence. Damon didn't speak to me. He stared out the window, his jaw set, his thoughts his own. I watched his reflection in the dark glass, the hard lines of his face, the coiled tension in his shoulders. I was voluntarily walking into the heart of the danger I had been so desperate to escape, and I was doing it beside the most dangerous man I had ever met. And the most terrifying part was, I felt safer with him than I had ever felt without him. The warehouse district was a graveyard of rusting steel and broken windows. Marcus pulled the SUV into a long, dark alley and killed the engine. Another identical SUV pulled in behind us, blocking the only exit. A handful of men in dark suits emerged from the shadows, their movements economical and professional. They nodded at Damon as he exited the vehicle. He came around and opened my door. "Stay here," he commanded. "Marcus will be with you." "Do not get out of this car for any reason." I nodded, my throat dry. He shut the door, and the world outside became silent again. Through the tinted windshield, I watched him walk toward the massive metal doors of a warehouse, his men fanning out around him. They moved with the silent, deadly coordination of a wolf pack. They disappeared inside, and I was left alone in the humming silence of the car with Marcus. Time stretched and warped. Every distant shout, every clang of metal from the nearby shipyard made me jump. I strained my ears, trying to hear what was happening inside, but there was nothing, just the oppressive, waiting silence. I looked at Marcus in the driver's seat. His face was a stoic mask, his eyes fixed on the warehouse doors. He was a mountain of calm, a silent promise of violence if needed. After what felt like an eternity, the warehouse doors slid open again. Damon emerged, walking calmly back toward the car. His expression was unchanged, but his knuckles were raw and split, and there was a small, dark smear of blood on the cuff of his white shirt. My stomach twisted. He opened my door. "It's done," he said, his voice flat. "Rick?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "He told us everything," Damon said, getting into the car beside me. "Where the rest of the money is. The names of his Petrov contacts. He was very cooperative." The implication was chilling. "He will no longer be a problem for you." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Damon looked at me, his gray eyes unblinking. "It means the debt has been settled." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Rick was gone, erased from the world as easily as my old scrubs had been. I should have felt something. Pity, horror, some lingering shred of affection. But all I felt was a profound, cold relief. The ghost that had haunted my life was finally exorcised. As Marcus drove us away from the docks, back toward the gleaming tower that was my prison and my sanctuary, Damon turned to me. "The Petrovs will retaliate for this," he said. "They will see this as a direct challenge. The danger is not over. It is just beginning." I looked at him, at the raw knuckles of the hand that had just dispensed brutal final justice on my behalf. I thought of Lily, sleeping safely in her unicorn pajamas, protected by a guard bear and an army of silent men in suits. The world outside was full of chaos and threats, of men like Rick and the Petrovs. But in here, in this car, beside this man, there was a strange and terrible kind of order. "I'm not afraid," I said, and I was shocked to find that it was the truth. He studied my face, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before his thumb gently brushed against my cheek. His touch was surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to the violence he was capable of. It was a gesture of ownership, of comfort, of terrifying intimacy. "Good," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Because you are staying with me." The aftermath of the warehouse confrontation settled over the penthouse like a quiet storm. The air was thick with unspoken things, with the knowledge of what Damon had done for me. He had eliminated a threat, a loose end, a man who had brought nothing but pain into my life. He had done it with ruthless efficiency, and a part of me, a dark primal part I didn't know existed, was grateful. The moral complexities were a luxury I couldn't afford. My only duty was to Lily, to her safety, and Damon was the guarantor of that safety. He was different with me now. The cold, assessing distance was still there, but it was tempered with something else. A watchfulness that felt less like a jailer and more like a guardian. He would seek me out, finding me in the small, sunlit sitting room where I often read while Lily napped. He wouldn't speak at first, just stand in the doorway or take a seat in the armchair opposite me, the silence stretching between us, filled with a heavy electric tension. One afternoon, he brought me a glass of wine. I looked up in surprise as he set it on the table beside me. "You look tired," he said. It was the closest he had ever come to expressing concern. "I'm fine," I said. My standard reply, the automatic response of a single mother who was never, ever fine. "No, you're not," he countered, his voice flat. "You're carrying the weight of the world. At least for now, you can let some of it go." He sat down, swirling the amber liquid in his own glass. "The Petrovs are making their move. They are trying to disrupt my shipping lines. It is a foolish, desperate gambit. They are wounded animals, and that is when they are most dangerous. And we're the bait," I said, the realization a cold knot in my stomach. "You are not bait," he corrected, his voice sharp. "You are the reason for the war. There is a difference. Bait is disposable. You are the prize." He looked at me over the rim of his glass, his eyes intense. "And I do not lose." The possessiveness in his voice no longer felt like a threat. It was a promise. A terrifying, all-encompassing promise. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich and complex, a world away from the cheap bottle I would occasionally buy myself as a desperate treat. Everything in his world was like that, uncompromising in its quality, its power. "Tell me about Lily's father," he said suddenly, his question catching me off guard. "Tell me about Rick." I hesitated. It was a part of my life I had tried to bury. "There's not much to tell. We were young. I thought he was charming. He had big dreams, always chasing the next big score. I was a fool who believed him." I stared into my wine glass, the memories bitter on my tongue. "When I got pregnant, he was happy at first. Or he pretended to be. But the reality of a baby, of responsibility, it was too much for him. He started staying out late, making bad deals, borrowing money from people he shouldn't have. He became a ghost in our lives long before he physically disappeared." "He was weak," Damon stated, the judgment absolute. "Yes," I admitted, a wave of shame washing over me for my own poor judgment. "He was." "Weakness is a disease," Damon said, his voice low and hard. "It infects everything around it. He would have destroyed you and the child one way or another, even without me or the Petrovs in the picture. He would have dragged you down into his own personal hell." He was right. I knew he was right. My life with Rick had been a slow-motion collapse, a constant struggle against his irresponsibility, his lies. My life before Damon had not been a peaceful haven. It had been a different kind of war, a war of attrition against poverty and despair. At least this war had a powerful general on my side. "Why did you choose to be a nurse?" he asked, his change of subject abrupt. "I wanted to help people," I said simply. "My mother was sick for a long time before she died." The nurses who cared for her, they were incredible. They were strong and kind in a place that was full of pain and fear. I wanted to be like them. He considered this, a thoughtful expression on his face. You run toward the chaos, not away from it. I suppose so, I said, just like I ran up to your door. And now the chaos has run to you, he finished, his eyes locking with mine. I have brought my world to your doorstep, Emma. I have put you and your daughter in the center of it. Do you regret knocking on my door? It was the most important question he had ever asked me. I thought about it, truly thought about it. I thought of the eviction notice, of Lily's wheezing breaths, of the soul-crushing exhaustion that had been my constant companion. I thought of the fear, yes, but also of the profound relief of seeing Lily healthy and happy, of not having to worry where our next meal would come from, of the strange, terrifying safety I felt in his presence. No, I said, my voice clear and certain. I don't regret it. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips. It was a seismic event, a crack in the granite facade that transformed his entire face. It made him look younger, more human. It was devastating. Good, he said again, the word now carrying a universe of meaning. He raised his glass in a silent toast. I raised mine in return. It was a treaty, an alliance, a surrender. I didn't know which, and I found I didn't care. The final confrontation happened a week later. The tension in the penthouse had been escalating daily. Damon was on the phone constantly, his conversations terse and coded. Extra guards appeared on the balconies, their presence a subtle but constant reminder of the siege we were under. One evening, Damon came to me. He was wearing one of his immaculate suits again, a dark navy that made him look like a figure of myth. It's time, he said. I am meeting with Alexei Petrov. We are going to end this. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the bubble of security I had built around myself. Meeting him? Where? Is it safe? It is on neutral ground. A restaurant he owns. He thinks it gives him an advantage. He is mistaken. He straightened his tie, his movements precise and calm. I am telling you this because there is a chance I will not come back. Don't say that, I whispered, my hand flying to my chest, my heart suddenly aching with a fear that was entirely for him. He looked at me, his gaze intense. This is the world I live in, Emma. Every day is a risk. But I have made arrangements. If something happens to me, Marcus has his orders. He will get you and Lily out of the city. You will be given new identities, a new life. A bank account with enough money to ensure you never have to worry about anything again. You will be safe. He was planning for his own death, with the same meticulous efficiency he planned everything else. And his first thought was for us. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This went beyond an obligation, beyond protecting a piece of property. The wall I had kept around my heart, the final barrier of self-preservation, crumbled to dust. I stepped toward him, my hands finding the lapels of his suit jacket. The fine wool was smooth under my fingertips. Come back, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Damon, you have to come back. He looked down at me, his expression softening. He lifted a hand and cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. I have a reason to now, he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. And then he lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hard, demanding. A kiss full of all the violence and control and desperate buried emotion that defined him. It was a brand, a claim, a promise of 1,000 unspoken things. I melted into him, my arms going around his neck, kissing him back with a ferocity that surprised me. It was a release of all the fear, the tension, the forbidden attraction that had been simmering between us for weeks. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine. "Wait for me," he breathed. "Always," I whispered back. He left. I stood in the middle of the vast living room, my fingers pressed to my lips, the ghost of his kiss burning on my skin. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I tried to play with Lily, but my mind was elsewhere. I tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. Every sound from the hallway made me jump. Elena brought me dinner, but I couldn't eat. The penthouse, my sanctuary, felt like a tomb without him in it. It was well past midnight when I finally heard the sound of the front door. I ran from my room, my heart in my throat. He was standing in the foyer, shrugging off his jacket. He was alone. He was alive. He looked tired, but he was unhurt. He saw me, and the weariness in his eyes was replaced by a familiar, intense focus. I ran to him, throwing my arms around him, burying my face in his chest. He was solid, real, warm. His arms came around me, holding me tight against him. "It's over," he said into my hair. "The Petrovs are no longer a threat. Alexei has retired. His empire is mine now." I pulled back to look at him, my hands framing his face. "You're okay?" "I'm okay," he confirmed. He looked down at me, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "Everything is okay. You and Lily are safe. For good." The relief was so absolute it made me dizzy. The war was over. The siege was lifted. We were safe. And then a new, terrifying thought occurred to me. The threat was gone. The reason for my being here, for his protection, was gone. "What now?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Now that it's over." He led me to the living room, to the massive window overlooking the city that was now unequivocally his. He stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. We looked out at the endless sea of lights together. "Now, you have a choice," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "A choice?" "The arrangements I made are still in place. I can give you and Lily a new life. Anywhere in the world you want to go. You can be Emma Smith or Jane Doe. You can be a nurse in a quiet town, or you can never work another day in your life. You can be free of all of this, free of me." He was offering me an escape, an exit from the gilded cage. I could go back to a semblance of a normal life, a life without armed guards and rival families and the constant threat of violence, a life without him. I looked at our reflection in the dark glass, the scared, struggling nurse from apartment 3A, and the powerful, dangerous man who had turned her world upside down. We were an impossible pair. But the thought of leaving, of walking away from him, left a hollow, aching void in my chest. My old life wasn't waiting for me. It was a life of quiet desperation, of constant fear of a different, more mundane kind. This life, his life, was dangerous and terrifying, but it was also vibrant. And in it, for the first time, I had a partner, a protector. A man who looked at me as if I were the most precious thing in his world. "What's the other choice?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He tightened his arms around me. "The other choice?" he said slowly, his lips brushing against my temple, "is to stay. To stop being a protected asset and start being a partner. To build a life here, with me. To let me be a father to your daughter. To be my wife." The word hung in the air between us, as shocking and as brilliant as a flash of lightning. Wife. He was offering me everything, not just safety, not just luxury, but a place at his side, a permanent place in his dark, violent, beautiful world. I turned in his arms to face him, my hands resting on his chest. I looked into his storm-gray eyes and I saw my future. It wasn't the future I had ever imagined for myself, but it was the one my heart, against all logic and reason, now desperately wanted. I saw a life where Lily would never want for anything, where she would be safe and loved. I saw a life with this complicated, dangerous, and fiercely protective man who had, against all odds, captured my heart. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice firm and clear. "My place is here. With you." The granite facade crumbled completely, replaced by a look of profound, raw relief. The king of the city, the man who bent the world to his will, looked at me as if I had just handed him the thing he wanted most. "Then come home, Emma," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I now recognized as love. "Come home to me." He kissed me again, and this time there was no desperation, no violence. It was a kiss of infinite tenderness, a kiss that sealed a promise. It was the beginning of our impossible, dangerous, and perfect new life. I had knocked on the wrong door in a moment of sheer desperation. I had been looking for a savior. What I found was a king, and in his shadowed kingdom I had finally, truly found my home. I was his, and he was mine, and together we would face whatever came next. The gilded cage was no longer a prison, it was a fortress, and we were its rulers.